Listen for the living word. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. And then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sundown they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases, and cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak, because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came out to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. This ends the reading of the word. Thanks be to God. Jesus is becoming a popular man. Certainly, if you start healing people in a place that has very little health care or access to health care, where mortality rates are high, and there comes a word that there is someone who will heal you, you will attract crowds. It says that the whole city was at the door. The whole city at the door looking for him. And he cured many of them. But boy, must he have been a bit overwhelmed by the need, by the suffering, by the desperate pleas. So in the morning, when it was still very dark. Now, those are two things that should not be put together. If it's still very dark, it is not morning. I'm sorry. I have told my boys that over and over and over again. So it is not morning. Christine, who's at the retreat, I was like, finally, you'll get to sleep through the night and have a good night's sleep. And she texted me yesterday morning and said, "The bells woke me up at 4:30. But he's up very early. Maybe he was up all night and could not sleep. And so he gets out and he tries to get ahead of people and go to a place that's deserted where the whole city will not find him and be waiting for him. Maybe outsmart him. And he goes there and he prays. I like this passage because Jesus gives something for introverts to relate to. Now, it's false to say that introverts don't like being with people or don't like people or aren't good with people. But what defines an introvert is that after being with people, they need to get away and recharge. They need their little caves or their places away. Energy is given to people, and so they need to find the energy in time alone. There's a poster that has a fist in the air that says, "Introverts unite! Occasionally, in small groups, for very limited periods of time." Some of you engineers might like this one. What's the difference between introverted engineers and extroverted engineers? When you talk to introverted engineers, they look at their shoes. When you talk to extroverted engineers, they look at your shoes. All right. One more. How many introverts does it take to change the light bulb? None. Don't change it. People will think you're home and come bug you. All right, that's enough. There's actually a theory that Jesus was neither introvert or extrovert, that he was balanced right in the middle, that he needed people, but he also needed that time to be alone, to pray, to remember who he was, to remember his purpose. And in fact, after he is praying and after he has that time away from the crowds, he comes back, his disciples find him, and he says, "Actually, we've got to move on. I'm not going to be able to help all those people. Because what I came to do was a bigger picture than this, a bigger message. And so that time of prayer, that time of alone, helped center him, to remind him of the big picture, of his bigger message of what he was called and sent to do. Yes, a lot of people still needed to be healed. But healing everybody at that time was not Jesus' main purpose. That would have overwhelmed him. Just the time constraints alone, he could not heal everybody's ailment in that region of the world during his life. And in fact, scriptures have 31 individual healings done by Jesus. 31 people. Not everyone was healed by Jesus. A fraction of the people were. That was not his main purpose of why he was there. Now, some say he healed so that people would know that he was the Son of God, that he had power, and they would listen to him. Perhaps, but I really think that Jesus simply healed because he was full of compassion and love and could not turn people away. It was probably difficult for him to move on. Probably his heart full of love and compassion to heal those he could. And that was who he was and who he was meant to be. So he moves on. He came for a deeper change. He came to bring a message, to proclaim a message that not only speak to physical healing, but spoke to a more radical change for all humanity. The message came from the same place that his compulsion, his desire, his compassion came from, a place of love, of overflowing, unconditional love that God has for every single person in creation. God's love for us and God's desire for us to be God's people is motivated by an overflowing of love. So God does not, though, just magically change and heal the whole world. Instead, God calls us to hear and enter into the message that Christ proclaimed, to see the way that Christ walked and to follow him and to walk as Christ walked. Because the change and the healing that the world requires would overwhelm even the Son of God walking this earth. That it would require all people to enter in and follow this message that Jesus has brought. It's good to see that Jesus needed to get away. That even Jesus does not take on every single problem that comes his way. That he sticks to a priority, that he knows who he is and what he's about, and he doesn't react to every single situation that he comes into. He knows his calling. And that calling meant moving on, and that calling meant sticking to his main purpose. You know, one thing I enjoyed about working with youth is youth are so passionate. In my career in ministry, working with youth, they often find out about the problems of the world and want so desperately to do something to change the world. They want to change the world. They will go to retreats and camps and be compelled and filled with God's grace and His Spirit and be motivated to change the world, change their life. And yet, as soon as some problems come their way and real life hits, it can be a despairing moment for them. That it's not always going to seem so hopeful, that it's not always going to be easy, or they will be overwhelmed by how much need there is and how big some of the problems can look. And part of youth ministry is to come alongside them and help them know who they are and help them to hear their calling, to know that what they are called to do will not overwhelm them, and that each step that they take is important, that it takes many, and many hearing the call of Christ, and many taking up the way of Jesus, and many following faithfully, doing in small ways what adds up to large transformation. Healing work, of course, is inseparable from Christian mission, as we see it's some of the first things that Jesus did. And we can work together to fulfill that calling and mission, and yet we can also be distracted and overwhelmed by the burden and need and difficulty of healing mission in this world. But we can't forget that it is part of our core calling, and to stay focused and to discuss and to pray just how we as a people, as a church, can bring healing to people in this world. I know when I get overwhelmed, I too need to take that time to center, to pray, to listen, and to recharge. To remember who I am, and to remember that God is with me in each step, and that every problem and every situation I come across is not meant for me to enter into. This kind of work requires that we pay attention to ourselves and our own spirits, just as many are doing on the retreat this weekend, to listen to the way that God speaks to us personally and the way that the Spirit moves us, the way we have been gifted and the things that we are good at are the gifts from God, and to use those for ministry. There's a story about a traveler walking a lane. He comes across 3 stonecutters working in a quarry. Each was busy cutting a block of stone. Interested to find out what they were working on, he asked the stonecutter what he was doing. The first said, "I am cutting a stone." Well, still no wiser, the traveler turned to the second stonecutter and asked him what he was doing. "I am cutting this block of stone to make sure that it's square and its dimensions are uniform so that it will fit exactly in its place in a wall." A bit closer to finding out what the stonecutters were working on, but still unclear, the traveler turned to the third stonecutter. He seemed to be the happiest of the 3, and when asked what he was doing, he replied, "I am building a cathedral." In another version, when they were asked what they were doing, the first stonecutter replied, "I am making a living." The second one said, "I am doing the best job of stone cutting in the entire country." The third stonecutter, when he asked the same question, said, "I am building a cathedral." When we walk the way of life, we can become overwhelmed by the needs of the world. So much so, we can spend our lives reacting and forget who we are or what we're called to be. We can begin thinking that our life is just about making a living and that we just have to make it each day. Or we can get so focused on our craft or what we do and be proud about it that our purpose is just to do something the best we can. There's no harm in that. But the third way is the way that brings joy, that helps remember who we are, who God calls us to be. Each of us staying focused and centered on the message that God gives to us. That each of us are called. It's called to walk that path of Jesus, called to walk the way that God has laid out for us, called to be a people full of compassion and grace, called for a greater purpose of building God's people so that all people may know how loved they are and that they too have a purpose. What is the message that drives you? What is the message that drives the church? What is the message that will change the world and change your life? And what do we need to do? What quiet place do we need to go to if we aren't hearing it, to be able to pray and hear and reconnect, to stay on message? Amen.